Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big 10, SEC, Big 12, PAC12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Lee, and once again, I hope you're staying safe amidst the pandemic, and I hope that you are having a great week so far. We'll be looking at any of the changes that were made in this top 25 teams poll from the AP, as well as seeing how the introduction of the Big 10 and the Pac-12 shake up the NCAA, as well as the poll as well. We'll also be looking into the top matchups from Week 6, as well as my picks for the top matchups in Week 6. Let's get right into it with the first segment for today, which I have got listed as the top matchups of the week. I'm simply going to be previewing them for the time being. I don't want to make my picks yet because I'm actually going to save that for my next segment, put it where your mouth is, just because, I like to play with the numbers. I like to go with some stuff like that. But there are actually some pretty big matchups this week in terms of who's playing, the pedigree of the teams that are playing. A lot of top 25 versus top 25 teams going against each other. But I chose to focus on 3 specific games. Some of them are due to how the teams are ranked. 2 of them are almost completely based on the ways that the teams match up each other in terms of the ranking, in terms of the top 25 poll, which I will get into a little bit. And the other matchup that I have focused on is either the most recognized or the second most recognized rivalry in all of college sports. But let's get right into the fact that there are so many matchups that really intrigue me this week, because I'm looking through all of the games that are available to us throughout this week, and a lot of them have some intrigue, whether if it's with the way the teams are ranked, whether if it's ranked teams playing unranked teams, so on and so forth, because a lot of these games, they either have potential for upset or they have potential to just be an absolutely amazing game. Like one of the games, for example, that I focused on in terms of the matchup itself, however, did not necessarily focus on when it came to my top picks, is number 4 Florida versus number 1 Texas A&M, currently standing at 2-0 in both the SEC as well as overall for the Florida Gators, actually sitting at currently a 6.5 point favorite over the Texas A&M Aggies, sitting at 1-1 within the SEC as well as overall in the ranking. And the reason why I chose not to focus on this matchup is because you look at the numbers, everything is completely lopsided one way. The Florida Gators have the advantage in every single conceivable way when it comes to points allowed, points scored, total offense, total defense, total offense, both on the run and in the air. When you consider things like the total yards they can score on offense versus their defense, the offensive game for the Gators is absolutely unfair relative to the Aggies in the way I see it, because you're comparing a 45-point offense to an offense that can only put up 21 on a good day, because currently the Aggies are sitting at 21.5 point per game mark. But the thing is that these two defenses are very even. 29.5 points for the Florida Gators, 32 points for the Texas A&M Aggies. However, the reason I chose not to focus on this matchup that much is because after looking at the film between the two teams, I can definitely see this one getting very lopsided in favor of Florida. It has nothing to do with anything that Texas A&M does wrong. It's more about the things that Florida does better. And the fact is, Florida, both to the eye test for me and according to the statistics, they are just a much better team. They know how to basically jam it down your throat. They know how to air out the ball, but they also know how to utilize the run game as well, because Currently, the differences between Florida and Texas A&M in terms of the run game is only about 11 yards. However, the difference between them in the passing game is a whopping 95 yards. Now, you can take it from me, somebody who has been a longtime football fan, somebody who has studied the game a lot over the past several years. But any single time you have a separation that great in any category in terms of the yardage factor, that stuff can get huge, because not only can it show that they are capable of preventing certain plays, not only does it show that they're capable at producing certain plays, but it also shows that it's a little bit skewed. That's the thing, is that when things get skewed, when things get lopsided, sometimes they get really accented, especially depending on the opponent you play. And when both teams have similar strengths, however, one team's strength is significantly better than another team's strength, then you know it's going to be a little bit of a lopside. And the key matchup that's going to be focused on here is going to be strength versus strength. In this case, scoring offense versus scoring offense. They both know how to absolutely throw yards on the board. They both know how to put points up on the board. However, the issue is that Florida is currently averaging double the number of points that Texas A&M is. And honestly, 6.5 points is going to be a bit of a tough take. I would easily take Florida minus 6.5. That's the thing. I can easily see a 7. I can easily see a 10. I can easily see an absolute lopsided matchup, because that's just the way that this thing kind of seems to be going based on the trajectory it goes. Like Virginia Tech and UNC, for example. The thing is, North Carolina is ranked number 8, sitting at 2-0, while Virginia Tech is sitting at 19th, ranked 2-0 as well. However, the big difference here is that according to the spread, UNC is only a 3-point favorite, but here's the thing why I find that so interesting. Virginia Tech offense has been absolutely flying, 41.5 points in each game on average, with 491 yards on average, which has been absolutely amazing. That means they know how to get the ball down the field. They know how to push it down your throat. They know how to essentially suffocate you, especially with the fact that they're averaging 319 yards rushing, which absolutely means they are absolutely eating the clock up. Part of the reason why Virginia Tech is winning a lot of these games is because they are absolutely having a time with the time of possession. Like, yes, I can argue that Virginia Tech has not necessarily faced quality opponents, NC State, which is not necessarily that big of a program, and Duke, who's more known as and then Duke, who's known much more as a basketball program than a football program. But the thing is that when it came to the NC State game, Virginia was very close, right on the cusp, 29 minutes and 5 seconds. However, they absolutely steamrolled Duke in terms of the possession department, 34 minutes versus the overall 60. And that's with, all the weapons that they have, because the thing about Virginia Tech is they absolutely know how to utilize everything they've got on the ground. The Hokies are so good at that. And if the Tar Heels have any chance, the thing is that they're going to have to rely on that defense that has just been absolutely dominant against the run. 54 yards against, but at the same time, think about it this way. The North Carolina Tar Heels, they have not had that quality of opponents yet either. Boston College is pretty much seen mostly as a hockey school, if I'm not mistaken, and Syracuse is once again seen more as a basketball school. Although they do have some football pedigree, but mostly seen as a basketball school. So it's going to be a little bit weird to see, but the thing is that these two teams are similarly lopsided, kind of like the Florida versus A&M game. But the thing is that if there's a weapon that the Tar Heels can use as the Achilles heel against the Hokies, it can absolutely be the running defense versus that Hokie offense. But the thing is that if Virginia Tech can get past North Carolina and that 54.0 yards per game defense that the Tar Heels have, the Hokies can absolutely dominate. 319 yards versus the run defense. It's going to be a battle of strengths once again. However, when it's different from the Aggies and the Gators, the Hokies and the Tar Heels, they are on opposite sides of the exact same ball. It's one thing when it's offense versus offense, defense versus defense. It's another thing when it's offense versus defense. It adds another layer to it that just makes the game really complicated, because North Carolina is more than capable of stopping Virginia Tech in the run game. And because Virginia Tech is only averaging 172 yards in the air, that means they have very little confidence in their quarterback. I can see why right now. Because currently Braxton Burmeister, he is currently sitting at 269 yards, 1 touchdown and an interception, and he is actually under 50% so far in the year. So I understand exactly why Virginia Tech might not exactly have the greatest faith in the young man, because of the fact that he has just not put up the production. He can't get the ball out of his hands. He just can't get to the receivers exactly where they need to be all the time. There is a few more matchups that do intrigue me a little bit, just because they feature top 25 opponents. And even though right now the odds don't exactly say it, the thing is that if you look at the numbers the way they are, especially at the betting lines, some of these games might be a little closer than we're thought to believe, just because solely based on the way that the betting lines are. Because when a game is supposed to be a blowout against a top 25 team versus a non-ranked opponent, we've seen trends on this show so far. We've seen a lot of stuff come up on the show. One of the things that I love talking about is I love talking about upsets. It's not necessarily because I want to bash on a highly ranked opponent for losing to an unranked one, but it's because I like seeing how amazingly fired up those losing teams get, even when everything is going to absolute garbage in terms of their season up to that point. Like, I'm sure SMU, they were on a little bit of a high, sure, and then they beat number 25 Memphis, and all of a sudden their stock skyrockets. Arkansas can be one of those teams where if they keep it close with Auburn, they most certainly have a likely spot in the top 25 ready for them. But the question is whether or not they can even get there in the first place. Because the thing is, Arkansas can absolutely hold you to less than where you need to be. The issue is that both Arkansas and Auburn are very similar in terms of their teams themselves. Yes, Arkansas had an upset win versus Mississippi State, who was number 16 in the country at the time. And yes, they do play very well to Auburn just because of the way that Auburn operates. Not the highest scoring offense, but also not the lowest scoring defense either. When you're comparing 15.5 points to 17.5, you might be thinking, oh my goodness, these two teams must have amazing defenses, right? Wrong. These two teams have atrocious offenses, especially when you compare them to the college game and where the college game trajectory has been. It has more or less gone to who's going to put more points on the board and who's going to be the fastest one to do it. That's the mentality I've been seeing a lot in the college game. However, for these two teams, they both average under 20 in offense, 15.5 to 17.5. And their defenses don't necessarily have brick walls on their team either, with 25.5 points against for Arkansas versus 20 flat for Auburn. Auburn is actually favored by 14.5 points, which is not a lot in the grand scheme of things. That's only a 2-score game. But the thing about those is that Arkansas is a team that can get very stubborn. They're not going to go anywhere. Yes, 39 for 64 for their quarterback, along with 412 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pair of picks for Felipe Franks, is not the greatest stat line in the world. But at the same time, Bo Nix is not much better, with 37 for 67 at 410, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. That's not much better. Both of these offenses have struggled to move the ball. Their total for most yards in a game, on average so far, is about the exact same as another team on offense alone. You could take these two teams and their yardage numbers, and that's probably going to be about the equivalent of the quarterback's passing yards if he has a rough day. It shows the ways that the college landscape is changing it shows you the way that the NCAA has kind of gone into action with some of this stuff. Like, let's even take this game super quick. Mizzou versus LSU. 14-point favorites of the LSU Tigers. However, they're 1-1, while Mizzou is currently sitting at 0-2. Connor Bezelnick is not that bad. He has roughly a 2/3 completion percentage with 286 yards and a touchdown. But the concern with that is that's through 2 games. But the thing is that Mizzou wanted a calendar where they just get dogpiled with tough opponents so they can learn how to push past it. Alabama is number 2. They got blown out by 19. They also want to play number 21 team in the country, Tennessee. And yeah, they might have gotten their butts handled at a grand total 23-point differential. However, they are battle tested and they're ready for anyone who's ready to step in. Lose to Tennessee, you lose to Alabama, and sometimes you need those losses in order to just be able to succeed and to be able to just knock off big offenses like that. That's our first segment of the day. That has been a preview of the Week 5 matchups, and we're going to be talking about my picks for the top games of the week, and also coming after that, the top 25 polls, how they've changed and how they did with the introduction of the Big 10 and the Pac-12, which is going to shake up the entire landscape of the NCAA. That is all coming up right after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we're back here on GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. Once again, Ryan Lee here, and we're going to be skipping forward a little bit into one of my personal favorite segments, one of the central hubs for all things sports betting. Put your money where your mouth is. Yes, once again, we are going back to put your money where the mouth is, because on Tuesday, I only talked about how I did with my Week 5 predictions. However, I never officially went through my Week 6 predictions, which is what I'm saving for today. However, before we get to that, any of that, let's get into some brand new sports betting technology so that if you have that 1% more knowledge, so that way, if you choose to make your bets, you are just that better educated. And this week's terminology is going to be referred to as the over-under. Now, you've heard the money line, you've heard the spread. You know, it's simply you pick a winner, and then you see if a favorite is going to win by the number they're favored by, or whether the underdog can actually take some control over the game. However, we're going to be going through a little bit of a different route here, as this one does not necessarily focus on the team's performance themselves, but rather the team's performances together with this thing that's referred to as the over-under. So the way that this works is that as per usual, Vegas, they create all these odds based on, all these analytics, all these statistics, so on and so forth. What they also make out of that is that they take some of the stats from the offenses and defenses of both teams, and what they do is they create this number. it's kind of a little bit of an ambiguous number. I honestly have zero idea what exactly the formula is for calculating this number, but all I do know is what the number means. And let me use an example from this coming week's matchup. I'll use Texas and Oklahoma because it's the first one that is popped up on my screen right now. Currently, Oklahoma and Texas, their over-under is at 73. Now, what does that even mean? It means that Vegas believes that, according to all of their statistics, which they have a lot of, by the way, that this game should be in the ballpark of 73 points scored between the both teams combined. So if you add up the winning team score and the losing team score, will you get this number that they refer to as the over-under? So let's say, for example, in this scenario, the one that I brought, Oklahoma and Texas, first one I have, their over-under is 73. Even though these are two very offensive teams, let's just say for purely hypothetical reasons, and to make my math easier, the game turned out to be 21-14. That means that the combined score of that game is 35, and that game went under the 73 they were supposed to score. You see how that works? It's the two teams combined. Let's go over the initial mark or under. Right now, Texas and Oklahoma at 73. If it was hypothetically, let's say hypothetically it was 45-40, then the combined score of that game is 85. That game went over what it was initially supposed to be. So do you think that the two teams together are going to go under the number that they were given or over? Literally, over, under. That's the over-under. Now let's get into the good stuff. I have done some deep digging into my games of the week this week, because I think there are some heavy hitting matchups that I think shake up the entire college football landscape. Because for some of these teams, the hardest opponent they have on their entire schedule comes this week. This one specific team that I have chosen as part of the game of the week this week, they have one more really tough opponent, but I don't know how they're going to fare out. So for the first matchup that I have picked, I have selected number 14 Tennessee, who's currently sitting at 2-0, versus number 3 Georgia. Now, looking into the matchup before today, I thought it was going to be a little bit lopsided. I thought, Tennessee, they had a COVID outbreak in the beginning of the year. They're not the strongest team in the world, yada, yada, yada. But they're actually a really strong team when you look at the numbers, and when I looked at some of their film from the past several games. They're actually surprisingly strong, and I think they can give Georgia a fight. Because Georgia's also 2-0, ranked number 3 in the country, and the Bulldogs are currently only a 12.5 point favorite over the Volunteers. Tennessee can definitely give Georgia a fight in this one. That's the thing. I thought that Auburn was going to give very little to Georgia. I believe I said that Georgia was going to win, not by the 6.5 that they were actually favored by, but close to about 10 to about 13. And I was actually right about that, because I didn't think Auburn had much to offer versus Georgia, because the systems just were not there well enough. However, the thing about Tennessee is that they can keep up. At a 3:30 start time, however, Georgia has the advantage of not having to travel halfway across the country, which, having just moved from New York to Florida in the past month, is a very difficult travel. Even if they do have some sort of private plane or bus or whatever, that 6.5 hours is exhausting. I guess in this case, halfway across the country. So 3.5 hours to 3 hours. That can get a little bit tiresome, to say the least. But let's look at them from the number standpoint, where they're actually very similar. 33 points on offense scored for the Volunteers versus the 32 versus UGA. 408 yards gained total by Tennessee versus Georgia's 414. The 408 from Tennessee breaks down to 182 on the ground versus 125.5 in the air. Meanwhile, Georgia has got 161 yards on the rush and 253 yards coming from the air for the Bulldogs. And then defense, these two teams are very similar as well. 19.5 points allowed for Tennessee versus 8 for Georgia. 361 yards allowed versus 238, advantage to Georgia, as well as in both their rushing and passing defenses, which sits at 58 versus 107 on the ground, and also 190 versus 254, also in favor of Georgia. The weird thing is that Stetson Bennett and Jared Guarantino, they're kind of very similar in terms of their numbers. That's the thing. That's why their passing yard numbers are so similar. Like, I physically have their numbers in front of me. Their difference between them is literally 2 yards. And their completion percentages are very similar. If I had to do the math in my head right now, it's maybe about 2%, 1% difference. Guarantino's sitting at 33 for 54, and Bennett sitting at 37 for 57. The thing about these two quarterbacks is they can absolutely sling. And they're very good at it. The thing that both teams have going for them is that they have both played 2 excellent games so far. However, Georgia has, I would say, 2 advantages, which is that both of their opponents have been tougher than Tennessee's. South Carolina and Mizzou have not really put up that big of a fight versus Tennessee, but Georgia faced 2 opponents who are actually really stubborn to play in Auburn, who was ranked number 7 at the time, and just completely shut them down. And then Arkansas, who, they're not the best team in the country right now. However, they are super stingy, and they do not turn down a fight. Even when their teeth are knocked down, they're super bloodied up, they're barely standing up. They're still going to fight. They're still going to throw some punches. And Arkansas is able to do that against Georgia. But a couple other things about this matchup is the fact that Georgia has won each of the last 3 games. 2019 it was 43-14, 18 it was 38-12, and 17 it was 41-0. A little bit of a lopsided matchup here, especially in the last couple. But the thing is that 2 of those games, both in 2018 and 19, were between Jeremy Pruitt and Kirby Smart, the current head coaches of Georgia and Tennessee. I am 100% taking Georgia to win this one. Kirby Smart has just absolutely dominated this Georgia team. And the thing is, this Georgia team, they are not backing down from challenges this year. They are willing to take every single punch they can get, and they're actually asking all of these teams on their schedule, hit me. I want you to punch me in the face because I will punch you right back. Because after Tennessee, where are they going? They're going to Nick Saban's house, and they are going into Alabama in Alabama. And then in 3 weeks from now, they are going to get a neutral location, and they're going to be playing a very tough Gator team who is just 1 spot behind them in the rankings right now at number 4 versus number 3. And if everything else pans out the way it's supposed to, this could potentially be a matchup we see in the college football playoff, barring whatever the Big 10, the Pac-12 does. I'm going to take Georgia minus 12.5, but I do think it's going to be a little closer than we expect. I can see Georgia's running attack to just absolutely shut down the Volunteers on the ground, because this is a game of strength versus strengths. Not one team's strength versus another team's weakness. And the thing is that Georgia's passing defense is actually not that far off from what Tennessee can produce on offense. They're allowing 60 fewer yards in the air than Tennessee is. And they're also gaining about 30 more yards in the air as well. I'm going to say Georgia wins this one maybe by about 14 or 13. It could honestly be as high as in the 20s, because Georgia's been that dominant. But Tennessee, for me, is a team that can put up a fight. I'm going to move on to my second game of the week, which is Clemson versus Miami. Number 7, Miami, currently sitting at 3-0 on the year, 2-0 only in the ACC. Clemson's at 3-0, 2-0 at the ACC. However, currently, Clemson is favored at minus 14. Clemson's a huge favorite right now. How could they not? They have the number 1 college prospect in the entire country right now, in Trevor Lawrence, who, by the way, has been dominant. That's not to say that Derek King has not been as powerful as well. But the thing is, he's also loaded with weapons, Trevor Lawrence is. I went back into the past, and I looked a little bit into some of the prospects he was compared to. The most recent one is the recently retired Andrew Luck, who we have talked about before on the show. Andrew Luck was drafted number 1 overall, but he was also seen as that last generational quarterback since Peyton Manning. And then when Peyton was drafted, the first one since Elway. Now the thing about all 3 of those guys, Elway is a Hall of Famer. Peyton is going to be a Hall of Famer. And if Luck did not get injured, let's say hypothetically ever in his career, 100% a Hall of Famer. Now, most unlikely, just simply due to longevity. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Peyton and Elway are both in the College Football Hall of Fame as well. So yes, Clemson is going to be in great hands with Trevor Lawrence, and Dabo Swinney has known exactly how to use him. The strange thing about this matchup was I'm surprised how few times these two actually played, considering how they're both in the same conference in the ACC. Because the last time these two teams played was back in 2017, where Clemson was able to just steamroll 38-3 in 2017. In 2015, it was 58-0. Granted, 2017, they had a freshman Trevor Lawrence. In 2015, I want to say they had Deshaun Watson, a multiple-time Pro Bowl quarterback currently for the Houston Texans. Into the numbers, you're going to think that these two teams are very similar. 43 points scored for Miami versus 42 for Clemson. 499 yards that are gained. Breaks down to 232 in the rush, 266 in the air. While Clemson has 477, breaks down to 161 on the ground and 316 in the air. While Miami can hold opponents to 19.3 points a game, which breaks down to 377 yards, 146 on the ground, 230 in the air. While Clemson defenses are holding opponents to 12 points per game, 303 yards, which comes out to 90 rush and 123 in the air. A common trend I have seen is that in this week's set of games specifically, the run game is going to be vital to both teams. Because currently speaking, Cameron Harris, he is on a tear right now. 311 yards for 5 touchdowns right now on 38 carries. That's currently sitting at 8 yards per carry, which is insane to the craziest degrees. Travis Etienne has 1 more carry, but 70 fewer yards and 3 fewer touchdowns than Cameron Harris. Harris is an absolute beast right now. But the thing is that Clemson knows how to stop a good rush. 90 yards per game, that's nothing for running backs. Running backs, they usually like to be fed. They usually like to be in the 100 pluses. They know how to stop a run game. The Tigers do. The thing about the Hurricanes is that if they want any shot at beating Clemson, they have to force this game into a shootout for them. But the thing is that they also have to hold Clemson to going to the ground. Because one of the biggest weaknesses on this Miami team is their passing defense. 230 yards is a lot of yards for a defense, especially when you consider that Trevor Lawrence is sitting at 316 and is the best quarterback in all of college football right now. The scariest part about Trevor Lawrence, he does not miss often. 73% completion rating, which is insane on any level. He averages 3 touchdowns per game right now. He's sitting at 7 touchdowns through 3 games right now. And I know for a fact some of those stats have to be inflated because Trevor Lawrence is also a good quarterback on his legs as well. 14 points is definitely something Clemson can do. And I think they will. Miami's definitely going to put up a fight, but it's going to get ugly. And I want to say it's going to get ugly fast. And when I refer to ugly, I don't mean like a lopside or a blowout. When I say ugly, I mean that it's going to be very physical. It's going to be very hard-hitting. these two teams might take a couple of cheap shots or something like that. You're going to see a lot of physical football. You're going to be seeing maybe a lot of penalties because they're going to be so jittery to either get to the quarterback or so jittery to block their pass rusher that someone's going to jump offside, someone's going to jump and false start. Going to be a lot of grabbing and holding in the secondary, probably some pass interference calls as well. This game doesn't start till 7:30, so we are going to have to wait to find that one out. But finally, my number one matchup of the day is arguably the second most well-known rivalry in all of college football. It's Texas and Oklahoma. Oklahoma actually dropped completely out of the rankings in their loss last week to Iowa State. I said it in, I don't remember if it was the Tuesday show or the Saturday show, but I said if Lincoln Riley cannot turn the ship around now, Oklahoma's in serious, serious trouble. They're not going to turn away any recruits because a lot of recruits can be like, oh my God, Oklahoma, such a good school for football. But at the same time, it might hurt Oklahoma's near future. But Texas has actually been pretty good so far this year. 2-1 despite their loss last week to TCU. But the thing is that with the way that these teams have played, I think that one does have a clear advantage over the other. 51 points per game for Texas versus 37 for Oklahoma. 517 yards, which breaks down to 191 on the ground for the Longhorns and 326 in the air for the Longhorns. Well, Oklahoma, they know how to sling the ball. 513 yards combined. However, that breaks down to 122 on the ground and 390 in the air. So the issue is not that Spencer Rattler cannot sling the ball. He can absolutely fire that. He can launch it. The issue is what some might refer to as situational football. We literally had two circumstances for Spencer Rattler, the quarterback for the Sooners, where he threw an interception at the last drive. I get that he's a freshman, but at the same time, yes, he has 4 interceptions, but 2 of them were on the game-winning or game-tying drive. You cannot do that. Their defenses actually look pretty similar as well. 30 points allowed for Texas, which breaks down to 377 yards, 216 allowed on the ground, and 250 allowed in the air, while Oklahoma allows 25 points on average, 317 yards in total, 85 yards against on the rush, and 232 in the air. The thing about the Red River Showdown is that Oklahoma has actually dominated in the past several years. They've won the last 2 and the last 7 of 10. In 2019, they won it 34-27. In 2018, they won it 39-27. And between Tom Herman and Lincoln Riley specifically, Lincoln Riley is 3-1. Because in 2017, he won the matchup 29-24. In 2018, Texas won one of the matchups against Oklahoma 48-45. The thing about these two teams is that Oklahoma knows how to handle Texas. Especially with the rushing attack that they do, Texas is. Oklahoma is great up front. Their front 7 has been very solid at stopping the rush at 85 yards. And their thing is that although their secondary has been a little leaky, I think they're more than capable of stopping Sam Ehlinger from really slinging it. The thing is that Sam Ehlinger can definitely sling it as well as Spencer Rattler. But the question for the Sooners isn't whether Rattler can keep up with Ehlinger. It's whether their defenses can decipher them quickly enough. Lincoln Riley runs a very tricky offense. It's a lot of speed involved, a lot of throwing, really complex, and makes you think and makes you work. I want Oklahoma to bounce back. I really do, and I think they definitely can. I'm going to take Oklahoma minus 2.5, actually. Lincoln Riley's know how to decipher Tom Herman. And the thing about head coaches is that it doesn't matter what players they have. They'll find a way to keep it competitive against each other. That has been put your money where your mouth is. And in the next segment, we're going to be talking about the top 25, some of the biggest shifts in the AP poll, as well as how the introduction, or I guess I should say reintroduction, of both the Pac-12 and the Big 10 shake things up completely. That's all coming up right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back here once again here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, Ryan Lee here as your host, and we just talked about my top picks for the week, as well as some of the other top matchups going throughout week 6 here on the college football schedule. Now, I'm going to be shifting into something that I have yet to talk about on this show, period. Why I have not talked about this topic yet, I do not know, but I need to start talking about it more because it is actually massive. And it is the AP poll for the top 25 teams in the country right now. The thing about this list is that the list kind of dictates a lot in terms of seeding, in terms of broadcasting schedules and the amount of publicity each matchup gets. And in terms of, at the end of the year, the college football playoffs, they are solely decided on who are the top 4 teams in the country. Which, by the way, I still think is a bit of a flawed system, but that's for another day. Alabama and Clemson, they're going to stay put. They're not going to move anywhere. Georgia and Florida actually flip-flop places despite not really that much going on. Notre Dame stays the same at 5. The thing that honestly surprises me the most is how, in this poll, they have Big 10. They have Pac-12. But I keep looking at this list, scratching my head, because I just see this random Big 10 team or Pac-12 team whose record is literally 0-0. They have yet to play a single snap. How can you rank any of these teams based on not having played a single snap yet versus all these other amazing teams who have played 2 to 3 to 4 games of football already at this point? That mind boggles me, to be honest. It really does. Because let me break it down to you simply this way. Ohio State, Big 10, have not played yet. They're ranked at number 6. And if I'm reading these numbers correctly, according to the AP poll, 2 people voted them number 1. Which to me makes 0 sense. Penn State ranked at number 9 right now. Oregon's currently sitting at number 12. With Wisconsin at 16, Michigan at 20, and Minnesota at number 25. And the crazy thing for me is that these are teams who have not played a single snap yet. But come about 2 weeks from now, everything changes. Because if I'm not mistaken, 2 weeks from now is when the Big 10 gets their schedule up and rolling, and then we can see from there how everything looks. When the Pac-12 comes back in about 3 weeks, I will say the exact same thing. However, the difference here is that the Pac-12 is not playing the same number of games as the Big 10, who is probably not playing the same number of games as the SEC, or the Big 12, or the ACC, or whomever else. And the thing is that top 4, they're going to have to figure something out about that. Because I know a bunch of reports in the beginning of the year said they're going to do it possibly off win percentage. But I remember there's a lot of pushback on that because they're like, why would you put in a team who maybe didn't play nearly as many games? which to me is kind of logical if you think about it. It makes sense, that concern. Auburn's loss to Georgia for them kind of really devastated them in terms of the overall rankings. It slid them down from 7 all the way to 13. However, it made a lot of these other very good programs like Miami, like North Carolina, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati. They jumped up multiple spots because of it. Oklahoma State jumped up 7. North Carolina jumped up 4. Cincinnati jumped up 4. And somehow, some way, Oregon, who has yet to play a game once again, jumped up a pair. BYU jumped 7 spots as well as Tennessee, which is another reason why I think that their matchup versus the Georgia Bulldogs is going to be huge for this week. I know that big upsets can be devastating to a team, not only to maybe the morale, not only to all the publicity they get, or whatever on God's green earth it may be, but I know for a fact it hurt badly for Texas getting upset by TCU, because that dropped them 13 spots. They were initially at 9, and now they're at 22. And then Texas A&M as well. For them, it wasn't really an upset. For them, it was just losing to Bama. That showed that Texas A&M cannot keep track with a lot of these top programs in the country, like a Clemson, like an Alabama, like a Georgia. It wasn't even close, 52-24. Clearly, the Aggies just could not keep up. And I think that the AP poll really punished them for that. One of my crazy jumpers, who I did not really expect to be anywhere close to this top 25, is actually SMU. The Mustangs have played phenomenally so far, actually. They actually went from unranked all the way to number 18. And the thing is that they have been playing excellent football. That's the crazy thing. They've been playing amazingly. They're actually first in the ACC, I believe. They're actually first in the AAC, which has some stingy opponents, by the way. Houston, Cincinnati, UCF. They're stingy opponents. Memphis was a top 25 team for a little bit. They're currently sitting at first in that conference at 4-0. And they beat some decent opponents. TCU is not a bad opponent at all. Memphis put up a very good fight. North Texas was able to launch 35 on SMU. They have been so dominant on offense. That's the thing that SMU has for them. I think for SMU, in order to keep up this momentum into the rest of the season, they've got to be able to get through Cincinnati, who's currently sitting at number 11, and Houston, their third best team in their conference at the end of the year. And if they can get those two things done, SMU, I can say it was a worthy top 25 opponent. But I'm just not 100% there yet because they have not faced many quality opponents. Like Stephen F. Austin, North Texas, like who are these teams? But credit is where credit is due. They are putting up 44 points a game, which is absolutely nuts. They don't really turn the ball over that much. 4 turnovers in 4 games, which for most teams is actually really low. But still, though, one turnover per game, that's not really something that should be happening for a top 25 program. But SMU is making it work. They're just firing the ball downfield. They're just going crazy on offense. And they have earned their right in the top 25, I'd say. But I think in order to cement that, they'd have to beat one of the best teams in their own conference in Cincinnati later in the year, in about 2 weeks' time from now. And I think I already have an idea of one of my top games of the week 2 weeks from now. It's probably going to be SMU and Cincinnati, honestly. Virginia Tech has also made a very interesting case for being on this list, because currently they went from unranked to the Hokies coming into 19. Because the thing about the Hokies is that they're currently sitting 2-0 as of right now. And they play in a very tough ACC conference. Virginia Tech has currently been putting up 41.5 points in a game. They're bringing up 319 yards on the ground, which means that they are absolutely eating up the clock right now. They don't really allow many penalties. Only 8 penalties all year, which is not a lot. And because they run so often, they not only get chunk plays on the ground, they also control the clock a little bit. One of the few teams where they actually have a time of possession over 30 on average. I could once again make the argument against the Hokies. They have not played very many quality opponents. I mean, NC State and Duke are not the greatest competition in the world, and they have put up about 27 on average. But the thing is that Virginia Tech has done a really good job at sustaining a strong program, despite all the stuff that they don't necessarily deal with normally. My biggest concern, but also the one thing I would love to see and the thing I'm hoping for the most, is to see what exactly happens in 2 weeks from now when the Big 10 is back, 3 weeks from now when the Pac-12 is back. Oregon might shoot up this list. Ohio State could become the number one team after only one game. Unlikely, but you never know. I'm usually not super crazy about whatever goes on because it's a little predictable at times. But the thing is, the predictability factor is no more. How are you going to deal with Clemson having a 4 to 5 game? How are you going to deal with potentially Clemson having 4 to 5 more games played than Ohio State? How do you rank that? How do you fix that? Put Penn State on there. You're going to compare them to, let's say, the Miami Hurricanes. They have 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 more games ahead of Penn State. How are you going to compare those two? Let's say for a purely hypothetical situation, Ohio State becomes the number 4 team in the country. But can you really gauge them properly versus teams like Florida and Notre Dame and Alabama who have played 3, 4, 5 games more than Ohio State did? We'll have to see. We will have to see. That was a look into the rankings, and for our final segment, I'm going to take a very brief dive into how the Big 10 and the Pac-12 coming into town, the reintroduction, the rebirth, if you would, how that affects the way that the rest of the college football landscape is going to pan out, and how these two conferences alone changes everything. That's coming up right after this.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Back here for the final time here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. Ryan Lee here for the final time, and we are just going to be talking purely on how the Big 10 and the Pac-12 shake everything up in the entirety of the rest of the NCAA, because if I'm not mistaken, the Big 12 restarts exactly 2 weeks from now. And I just had this thought back during the Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is segment that going into the AP Top 25 segment, everything really changes with the Big 12 and the Pac-12. With the Big 10, the Pac-12 coming in, everything really changes. And I was trying to think, we know why it changes. We know what is changing. The question is, how is it changing? How is this going to work? Well, to our knowledge, we know that they're both playing with briefer schedules. The Big 10 is playing 8 games, and the Pac-12 is playing 7. And the thing is that amongst these two conferences alone, there are great opponents. Ohio State is currently ranked at number 6 in the poll despite having not played a game yet. because Ryan Day and Justin Fields have just been that good. Penn State currently sitting at number 9. Oregon sitting at 12. Wisconsin sitting at 16. Michigan's currently ranked at 20 with Jim Harbaugh at the helm. Minnesota is still in the top 25 at number 25. And the cool thing that ESPN has done is they gave a comprehensive list of how many votes every other team that is out of the top 25 got. So their top 25 list, they really help us break it down to about 30 to 40. USC is still getting votes. Utah still getting votes, as is Iowa. Arizona State still got votes. Washington still got votes. Indiana still getting votes. Like, how? They haven't played a game yet. I think this is the AP's way of saying when these guys comes back, everybody better watch the F out. Because they are going to have some stiff competition to combat against. Because I know for a fact, Jim Harbaugh runs a very stingy offense. It most likely runs in the family because John Harbaugh is doing the exact same thing over at the Baltimore Ravens. A very great offense, and Jim Harbaugh knows how to run an offense. We've seen how the San Francisco 49ers collapsed when he left. Like, come on, Chip Kelly was your first choice after Jim Harbaugh, who took you to a Super Bowl and NFC Championship with the Niners. Clearly, he knows how to get good programs to where they need to be. The thing about the Badgers is that I believe they made it to the Rose Bowl last year, showing that they're one of the top teams in that conference. Wisconsin can absolutely terrorize people. They've had great prospects over the past several years, and I believe that they actually held Oregon in check for a majority of the Rose Bowl, and Oregon's currently ranked at number 12. But with the departure of Justin Herbert, who knows how that affects everything? Because Justin Herbert, so far in the NFL, has been excellent for Los Angeles Chargers. So who knows if that loss for Oregon is going to be devastating or if it doesn't matter. If any of these teams perform just completely out of their minds, Big 10 or Pac-12, I would have to say that they might either leave it to the poll or leave it to winning percentage. Honest to God. Because there's no way 4 teams can stay undefeated. I don't remember the last time it's happened. I don't even think it's happened ever. Oklahoma made it to the top 4 each of the past 3 years, and they lost twice. There are not that many undefeated teams that go into the college football playoff, period. Maybe the number 1 overall team, but to have 4 of them, no chance. But that could be a possibility because teams like Ohio State, teams like Penn State, teams like Oregon, they're playing in a bridge schedule. So there's not as much wear and tear on the bodies. There's not as much travel. There's not as much fatigue by the end of the year. There's not that much that they're banged up by. So these teams could be healthier by the end of the year as opposed to normal years, which in turn could help keep them healthy throughout the long run. Let's take Clemson for an example. By the end of the year, they're going to have a lot more bumps and bruises and hits that they're going to sustain versus Ohio State. Clemson has 11 games worth of bumps and bruises and hits and adversity that they've had to deal with. Ohio State's only going to have 8 games. 8 versus 11. And I know you're probably looking at me, 3 games is not enough. But in any professional sport, especially the sport of football, where you only get 13 in the NCAA, you get 16 in the NFL, barring any playoffs. That's huge. That is huge. Let's say, for example, in the NFL 1 game difference between 2 teams, let's say like however the whole pandemic thing shakes up, which I might talk about next week depending on how this week's results pan out for the NFL and their COVID situation. That is 6% of their season. If one team plays one less game, that's 6% of their season lost, but that's also 6% fewer bumps and bruises. 1 in 13 is greater. That's 8% of their season that gets lost. But you got 3 of those. So technically, teams like the Pac-12 and the Big 10, they're playing only 3/4 of the schedule that the rest of the teams are getting. 11 to about 8. It's going to be crazy to see how this plans out. And I'm excited to watch every little bit of it happen. and we'll just have to wait and see for the reintroduction of the Big 10 in 2 weeks and for the Pac-12 in 3 weeks. Well, that has been it for today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I would ask that you please subscribe to the show and write a review and a nice comment. It really does help us out. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. The links will be down in the description below. For all of us here at the GSMC Podcasting Network, my name is Ryan Lee. I want to say thank you and have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network, from football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.